A flight that changed everything. A billionaire CEO falls asleep on a stranger's shoulder mid-flight. When she wakes, she discovers he quietly took care of her, charged her phone, protected her rest. But this man isn't a billionaire. He's a struggling single father working multiple jobs to raise his little daughter. And that one small act of kindness is about to change everything. Stay with me until the end, hit like, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The alarm went off at 4 in the morning, and Victoria Hale didn't even flinch. She was already awake. She'd been awake since 3:15, actually, lying flat on her back in the king-size bed of her penthouse suite, staring at the ceiling and mentally reviewing the investor deck she was supposed to present in LA tomorrow afternoon. Her mind didn't shut off anymore. It hadn't in years. She sat up, swung her legs over the side of the bed, and reached for her phone on the nightstand. 23 emails since midnight. She scrolled through them with mechanical efficiency, firing off replies in terse, clipped sentences. No pleasantries, no filler, just directives. By 4:45, she was showered, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and standing in her kitchen with a black coffee she wouldn't finish. The city sprawled out beneath her floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago still half asleep under a blanket of early winter fog. She didn't look at it. She was already thinking about the flight, the meeting, the next quarter's projections. Victoria Hale was 30 years old and worth just over $2 billion. She'd built her company from the ground up, a tech logistics platform that had revolutionized supply chain management for mid-sized manufacturers. She'd been profiled in Forbes, Time, and the Wall Street Journal. She had a corner office on the 43rd floor, a Tesla she never drove, and a reputation for being ruthless, brilliant, and completely unapproachable. She also had no friends, no partner, and no idea what she was doing with her life beyond the next earnings call. The car service picked her up at 5:30. The driver didn't speak. She didn't either. She answered emails the entire ride to O'Hare, her thumbs moving in rapid, precise taps across the screen. By the time they pulled up to the departure terminal, she'd cleared her inbox down to 8 messages, all of which could wait until she was at cruising altitude. She moved through security with the detached efficiency of someone who flew twice a week. TSA pre-check. No liquids. Laptop out. Shoes off. Then back on. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. She didn't need to. People moved out of her way instinctively, sensing the aura of someone who had no time and even less patience. At the gate, she sat in the corner as far from other passengers as possible and opened her laptop. The presentation still needed work. Slide 7 was cluttered. Slide 12 didn't flow. She made notes, adjusted fonts, reordered bullet points. Around her, the gate area began to fill with the usual assortment of travelers, business types like herself, families with too much luggage, a couple of college kids in hoodies slouched over their phones. She tuned them all out. Boarding began at 6:50. She was in first class, naturally. She boarded in the first group, stowed her bag in the overhead compartment, and settled into seat 2A, the window seat. She liked the window. It meant no one could lean over her to look out, and she could angle her laptop screen away from prying eyes. She pulled out her phone, her laptop, her charger, her AirPods, and a half-empty bottle of water. She arranged everything on the tray table in front of her with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Then she put her AirPods in, opened a playlist of ambient noise, and went back to work. The seat next to her remained empty as the cabin filled. Good. She hated sitting next to people, hated the forced small talk, the invasion of her space, the inevitable elbow wars over the armrest. If she was lucky, the seat would stay empty and she could stretch out a little, maybe even get some actual sleep before the meeting. She wasn't lucky. At the last possible minute, just as the flight attendants were starting to close the overhead bins, a man appeared in the aisle beside her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a faded blue jacket over a gray hoodie and jeans that had seen better days. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder and a small pink rolling suitcase in his other hand. And behind him, clutching the handle of that suitcase with both tiny hands, was a little girl. The girl couldn't have been more than 6. She had dark curls pulled into 2 lopsided ponytails, a purple winter coat that was slightly too big for her, and a stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Her eyes were wide and excited as she looked around the cabin, taking everything in like it was the most amazing thing she'd ever seen. Victoria's stomach sank. The man glanced down at his boarding pass, then at the seat numbers above the row. then at Victoria. He offered a small, apologetic smile. "Hey, sorry, I think we're next to you." His voice was low, a little rough around the edges. Not unfriendly, but tired. Victoria glanced at the seat number on his boarding pass, 2B, the middle seat, and felt a spike of irritation. Of course, not only was her row full, but she was sitting next to a man and a child. A chatty child, probably. A wiggly, noisy, invasive child who would kick her seat and ask questions and make the next 4 hours absolutely unbearable. She didn't say anything. She just pulled her laptop a little closer and angled her body toward the window, a silent signal that she had no intention of engaging. The man didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. He lifted the pink suitcase into the overhead bin with one hand, then helped the little girl out of her coat and folded it on top of the suitcase. The girl climbed into the aisle seat, 2C, and immediately pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging up the glass. "Daddy, look! I can see the plane wing!" "I see it, Em. Pretty cool, huh?" The girl nodded enthusiastically, her ponytails bouncing. The man settled into the middle seat, pulling his backpack onto his lap and unzipping it to pull out a small tablet, a pair of child-sized headphones, and a Ziploc bag of crackers. He handed the crackers to the girl, who accepted them with a grin. "Thanks, Daddy." "You're welcome, sweetheart. Remember, we're on a plane, so we use inside voices, okay?" "Okay." Victoria felt her jaw tighten. Great. The guy was one of those, overly involved, constantly talking to his kid, probably the type who thought everyone else on the plane would find his daughter as adorable as he did. She turned her attention back to her laptop, typing with slightly more force than necessary. The plane began to taxi. The flight attendants went through the safety demonstration. Victoria had heard it so many times she could recite it in her sleep. She kept working, ignoring the bustle around her, ignoring the man beside her as he helped his daughter fasten her seatbelt and adjust her headphones. The girl, Emma, he'd called her, kept looking out the window, narrating everything she saw in a stage whisper that was probably supposed to be quiet but really wasn't. "Daddy, we're moving. Daddy, we're going fast. Daddy, are we flying yet?" "Not yet, Em. Soon." Victoria resisted the urge to sigh. She pulled her AirPods out, closed her laptop, and leaned her head back against the seat. Maybe if she pretended to sleep, they'd leave her alone. The plane picked up speed, the engines roared, the nose lifted. And then they were airborne, Chicago falling away below them, the grid of streets and buildings shrinking into a patchwork of lights and shadows. Emma gasped, "Daddy, we're flying. We are. Can you see, Daddy? Can you see how small everything is?" "I can see, baby." Victoria opened one eye and glanced over. The man was leaning slightly toward his daughter, pointing out the window, his face soft with patience. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't distracted. He was just there, fully present, fully engaged. Something about it made Victoria's chest feel tight. She closed her eye again and tried to ignore it. The seatbelt sign dinged off. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. Around her, passengers settled into their routines, some reading, some sleeping, some scrolling through their phones. Victoria reopened her laptop and went back to her presentation. The numbers needed to be sharper. The projections needed to be more aggressive. The board was expecting growth, and she was going to deliver it, even if it meant working through the entire flight. Beside her, the man was helping Emma set up a movie on the tablet. He kept his voice low, explaining how the headphones worked, showing her how to adjust the volume. Emma watched him with absolute trust, nodding along, her little fingers fumbling with the buttons until she got it right. "Good job, Em. You got it." "Thanks, Daddy." He kissed the top of her head, then settled back in his seat and pulled out a book from his backpack. An actual physical book, not a Kindle. The cover was worn, the pages dog-eared. Victoria couldn't see the title, but she caught a glimpse of the author's name, something literary, something she probably should have read in college, but never did. She went back to her laptop. An hour passed, then another. Victoria's eyes started to burn from staring at the screen, but she pushed through it. She had to. There was always more work to do. Always another email, another revision, another fire to put out. That was the price of success. That was what it took to stay on top. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. "Board meeting moved to 10 a.m. tomorrow. Need revised deck by 8. Victoria's jaw clenched. Of course they did. She typed back a curt reply. "Fine." She closed the laptop and rubbed her temples. Her head was starting to throb. She'd skipped breakfast. Again. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a real meal that wasn't ordered from some overpriced restaurant and picked at between conference calls. The flight attendant came by with the drink cart. Victoria ordered a sparkling water and downed half of it in one go. Beside her, the man ordered a ginger ale and a cup of ice water for Emma, who had paused her movie to accept it with both hands, careful not to spill. "Thank you," Emma said to the flight attendant, her voice small and earnest. "You're very welcome, sweetheart," the attendant replied, smiling. Victoria felt something twist in her chest again. She didn't know why. She turned back to the window and stared out at the clouds, trying to focus on nothing, trying to quiet the noise in her head. She was exhausted. Bone-deep, soul-crushing exhausted. Not just from the lack of sleep, but from everything. The constant pressure, the endless demands, the relentless pace of a life that never slowed down, never gave her a moment to breathe. She leaned her head against the window, the cool glass pressing into her temple. Her eyes felt heavy. She blinked, once, twice, trying to stay awake, trying to stay focused. But the exhaustion won. Her eyes drifted closed. Her head started to tilt. And before she could stop herself, before she could pull herself back, she felt her body lean sideways, her head dropping onto something warm and solid. She was asleep before she realized what had happened. Marcus Reed felt the weight settle against his shoulder and froze. The woman beside him, the one who'd been glued to her laptop since the moment she sat down, the one who radiated a kind of cold, unapproachable energy that screamed, "Do not talk to me," was now leaning against him, fast asleep. Her head rested on his shoulder, her dark hair falling across her face. Her breathing was slow and even, her body completely relaxed in a way that seemed almost foreign, like she didn't do this often. Like she didn't let herself do this often. Marcus glanced down at Emma, who was still engrossed in her movie, headphones on, oblivious to everything around her. Then he looked back at the woman. He should wake her. It was the polite thing to do, the normal thing to do. You don't just let a stranger sleep on you for 4 hours. That's weird. That's invasive. But she looked so tired. Not just tired, exhausted. Like she hadn't slept in days, maybe longer. And there was something almost vulnerable about the way she'd collapsed against him. Like her body had just given up. Like it had decided it didn't care about propriety or personal space or keeping up appearances. It just needed rest. Marcus knew that feeling. He shifted slightly, trying to make himself more comfortable without disturbing her. His shoulder was already starting to ache, but he ignored it. He dealt with worse. He'd spent the last 6 years working 2 jobs, sometimes 3, pulling double shifts and sleeping in 4-hour intervals when he could. A stiff shoulder was nothing. He glanced at his book, still open on the tray table in front of him, but he didn't pick it up. He didn't want to move too much. Didn't want to risk waking her. So he just sat there, staring at the seat in front of him, feeling the weight of this stranger's head on his shoulder, and wondering what kind of life she led that left her this worn down. An hour passed. The woman didn't stir. Her phone, which had been sitting on the tray table, lit up a few times with notifications, emails, texts, calendar reminders. Marcus glanced at the screen and saw a dozen unread messages, all marked urgent, all from people with corporate titles in their contact names. Her phone buzzed again, louder this time, and the screen lit up with a low battery warning, 5%. Marcus hesitated, then reached over carefully, moving slowly so he wouldn't wake her. He picked up her phone, found her charger tangled up with her laptop cord, and plugged it in. The charging icon appeared on the screen. He set the phone back down gently and returned his hand to his lap. Emma looked over at him, pulling one headphone off her ear. "Daddy, is that lady sleeping on you?" "Yeah, Em, she is." "Why?" "Because she's tired, I think." "Oh." Emma considered this for a moment. "Is she nice?" Marcus glanced down at the woman again. He didn't know. They hadn't exchanged more than a few words. But there was something about her, something in the way she'd looked at Emma earlier, not with annoyance exactly, but with a kind of weary resignation, like she wasn't used to being around kids, wasn't used to being around anyone who wasn't trying to sell her something or get something from her. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I think maybe she's just having a hard day." Emma nodded sagely, as if this made perfect sense. "Sometimes I have hard days too." "I know you do, baby. But then you make me feel better." Marcus smiled. "I try." Emma put her headphones back on and returned to her movie. Marcus leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes, not sleeping, just resting, letting the hum of the plane engines wash over him. He thought about his life, about the double shifts at the warehouse, the weekend gig driving for a rideshare company, the night spent helping Emma with her homework at the kitchen table of their cramped one-bedroom apartment. About the bills that never seemed to stop coming, the credit card debt that kept creeping higher, the constant gnawing anxiety that he wasn't doing enough, wasn't giving her enough, wasn't enough. And then he thought about this woman sleeping on his shoulder, this stranger who probably had more money in her checking account than he'd earn in 10 lifetimes. And he wondered if she was happy. He doubted it. Money didn't fix everything. He knew that. He'd grown up without much, and he'd learned early that the things that mattered most, love, kindness, presence, didn't have a price tag. But still, it would be nice not to worry. Nice to know that Emma's tuition was covered, that the rent was paid, that he could take a day off without calculating how many hours he'd have to make up to cover it. But that wasn't his life. And wishing for something different wasn't going to change it, so he did what he always did. He focused on what was in front of him. Emma. This flight. Getting to LA safely, visiting his sister for a few days, giving Emma a little break from their routine. Small things. Manageable things. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, a brief jolt that made a few passengers gasp. The woman stirred slightly, her head shifting against his shoulder, but she didn't wake. Marcus instinctively lifted his arm, creating a small buffer between her and the tray table, just in case the plane jostled again. It did, a few minutes later. Another bump. The seatbelt sign dinged on. The flight attendant's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional, asking everyone to return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts. Emma looked up at him, her eyes wide. "It's okay, Em. Just a little bumpy air. Nothing to worry about." "Okay, Daddy." The turbulence settled. The seatbelt sign stayed on. Marcus kept his arm where it was, a quiet, unconscious gesture of protection, even though the woman sleeping beside him was a complete stranger. Another hour passed. The plane began its descent into Los Angeles. The flight attendant came through the cabin, collecting trash, asking passengers to put their seats upright and stow their tray tables. Marcus carefully reached over and folded the woman's laptop closed, moving it to the empty space under the seat in front of her. He tucked her charger into the seat pocket, along with her water bottle. Emma took off her headphones and looked out the window, watching as the sprawl of LA came into view below them. Endless streets, palm trees, the glint of the ocean in the distance. "Daddy, we're almost there." "Almost, baby." The woman shifted again, and this time her eyes fluttered open. She blinked, disoriented, her face still pressed against Marcus's shoulder. For a moment she didn't move, didn't seem to register where she was or what was happening. Then she did. Her head snapped up. Her eyes went wide. She looked at Marcus, then at Emma, then back at Marcus. Her expression a mixture of horror and mortification. "Oh my God," she said, her voice hoarse. I'm so sorry. I don't. She sat up straight, pulling away from him like she'd been burned, her hands flying to her hair, trying to smooth it down, trying to compose herself. Marcus gave her a small, reassuring smile. "It's okay. You were tired. It happens." I don't usually." She stopped, her face flushing. "I'm really sorry. That was so unprofessional. It's a plane, not a boardroom. You're allowed to fall asleep." She stared at him, clearly not used to people being kind to her without wanting something in return. Her eyes flicked to the tray table, then to the seat pocket, and she seemed to notice for the first time that her laptop had been closed, her things organized, her phone charging. "Did you? Your battery was low. I figured you'd want it charged when we landed." She looked at him again, and for a moment Marcus thought he saw something crack in her expression. Something raw and unguarded, something that looked a lot like disbelief. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "It's no big deal." She nodded, but she didn't look away. She kept staring at him, like she was trying to figure him out, trying to understand why someone would do something nice without expecting anything in return. The plane bumped as the wheels touched down. Emma squealed with delight. "We're here! Daddy, we're in L.A.!" Marcus grinned. "We are, Em." The plane taxied to the gate. Passengers started gathering their things, pulling bags from the overhead bins, crowding the aisles. Marcus helped Emma into her coat, then grabbed their pink suitcase and his backpack. The woman beside him was already on her feet, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, her phone in her hand. She looked at him one more time, her expression still unreadable, and then she said very quietly, "Thank you. Really." And then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd, swallowed up by the crush of people moving toward the exit. Marcus watched her go, then turned his attention back to Emma, lifting her onto his hip as they made their way slowly down the aisle. "Daddy?" "Yeah, sweetheart?" That lady seemed sad. Marcus thought about that for a moment. "Yeah, Em. I think maybe she was." "Do you think she feels better now?" He didn't know, but he hoped so. "Maybe, baby. Maybe." They stepped off the plane and into the terminal, and Marcus didn't think about the woman again. But she thought about him. Rats. Victoria stood in this baggage claim area, staring at the carousel as it churned out suitcase after suitcase, and she couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. She'd fallen asleep on a stranger. Not just fallen asleep, collapsed, completely let her guard down in a way she hadn't done in years. And he'd just let her. He hadn't woken her, hadn't made a big deal out of it. He'd charged her phone, he'd moved her laptop, he'd protected her space when the plane hit turbulence. He'd taken care of her, and he didn't even know her. Victoria pulled her suitcase off the carousel and headed toward the exit, her mind still spinning. She didn't know his name, didn't know anything about him except that he was a single father traveling with his daughter, that he read real books, that he wore a faded jacket and worked in jeans and had a smile that seemed completely genuine. She thought about the way he'd talked to his daughter, the patience, the warmth, the absolute unshakable presence. She thought about the way the little girl had looked at him, like he was the most important person in the world. When was the last time someone had looked at Victoria like that? When was the last time she'd let someone? She walked out into the California sunshine, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something other than exhaustion. She felt unsettled. The car service was waiting. She climbed into the back seat and pulled out her phone. 53 new emails, 12 texts, 3 missed calls. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the notifications. And then she put the phone down. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes, and all she could think about was the weight of her head on a stranger's shoulder and the quiet kindness of someone who had absolutely nothing to gain from being kind. The meeting went fine. Better than fine, actually. The investors loved the presentation. They asked smart questions, nodded at all the right moments, and by the end of it, Victoria had secured another $70 million in funding. Her CFO sent her a congratulatory text before she'd even left the conference room. Her assistant scheduled a celebratory dinner with the executive team. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages from board members, all of them thrilled, all of them ready to talk about scaling, expansion, the next big move. Victoria sat in the back of the car on the way to her hotel and felt absolutely nothing. She stared out the window at the palm trees lining the streets, at the endless sprawl of LA traffic, at the billboards advertising movies and tech startups and luxury cars. Everything looked the same as it always did. Bright, busy, expensive, empty. She thought about the man on the plane. She didn't know why. It didn't make sense. She'd spent 4 hours sitting next to him, most of which she'd been unconscious for, and yet she couldn't stop replaying the moment she'd woken up. The mortification, the apology that had stumbled out of her mouth, and the way he'd just smiled and told her it was okay. Like it really was okay. Like it wasn't weird, or unprofessional, or invasive. Like people fell asleep on him all the time and he didn't mind. She thought about his daughter, the little girl with the lopsided ponytails and the purple coat. The way she'd called him daddy in that sweet, unself-conscious way kids did when they still thought their parents were perfect. The way he'd listened to her, really listened, not just nodding while scrolling through his phone or mentally planning his next move. Victoria couldn't remember the last time anyone had listened to her like that. She checked into her hotel, a 5-star place in Beverly Hills with a lobby full of marble and gold fixtures, and people who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. The concierge greeted her by name. The bellhop took her bag. The front desk manager personally handed her the key card and informed her that her suite had been upgraded. Victoria thanked them all and went upstairs. The suite was ridiculous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a king bed with about 9 decorative pillows, a bathroom with a soaking tub big enough for 3 people, a minibar stocked with champagne she wouldn't drink and chocolates she wouldn't eat. She dropped her bag on the floor, kicked off her heels, and stood in the middle of the room staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed. Another congratulatory text. Then another. Then an email from her assistant with a revised schedule for tomorrow, 2 more meetings, a lunch with a potential partner, a call with the PR team about the funding announcement. Victoria sat down on the edge of the bed and put her phone face down on the nightstand. She was 30 years old. She had more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. She had a company that was growing faster than anyone had predicted. She had influence, power, respect, and she was completely, utterly alone. She thought about the man again. The faded jacket, the worn jeans, the book with the dog-eared pages, the way he'd helped his daughter with her headphones, patient and unhurried, like he had all the time in the world, even though Victoria was pretty sure he didn't. She wondered what his life looked like, where he lived, what he did for work, whether he was happy. She wondered if he ever thought about her. Probably not. Why would he? She was just some woman who'd passed out on him during a flight. A stranger. A blip. Nothing. Victoria lay back on the bed, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. The exhaustion that had knocked her out on the plane was creeping back, but this time it felt different, heavier, more suffocating. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. She couldn't. Marcus's sister lived in a small house in Pasadena, a 2-bedroom bungalow with a front yard full of overgrown grass and a lemon tree that dropped fruit onto the cracked driveway. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and she was proud of it. She'd bought it 3 years ago after saving for a decade, working as a nurse at a hospital downtown, pulling night shifts and overtime and every extra hour she could get. Her name was Renee, and when she opened the door and saw Marcus standing there with Emma on his hip, she let out a shriek and pulled them both into a hug so tight Marcus thought his ribs might crack. "Oh my God, look at you! Look how big you got, Em! You're huge!" Emma giggled. "I'm not huge, Aunt Renee. I'm 6. 6 is huge! Last time I saw you, you were practically a baby. Now you're like a whole person." Marcus grinned. "She's definitely a whole person. A very opinionated whole person." Renee laughed and ushered them inside. The house smelled like cinnamon and coffee. There was a pile of laundry on the couch, a stack of medical textbooks on the kitchen table, and a cat curled up on the armchair in the corner. The cat opened one eye, assessed them, and went back to sleep. "That's Mocha," Renee said. "She's a jerk, but she's cute, so we let it slide." Emma stared at the cat with wide eyes. "Can I pet her?" "Sure, but don't be surprised if she swats at you. She's not big on new people." Emma approached the cat slowly, one hand extended. Mocha lifted her head, sniffed Emma's fingers, and then, to everyone's surprise, started purring. Renee blinked. "Okay, that's weird. She hates everyone." "Emma has a way with animals," Marcus said, "and people. And pretty much everything." Renee looked at him, and her expression softened. "You doing okay, Marcus?" "Yeah, I'm good." You look tired." "I'm always tired." "I know." She squeezed his arm. "Come on, sit. I made coffee." They sat at the kitchen table while Emma played with the cat, and Renee poured them both coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewed sometime that morning and reheated at least twice. Marcus didn't care. It was hot and caffeinated, and that was all that mattered. "So," Renee said, sitting down across from him, "how's work?" "Busy, same as always." "You still doing the warehouse thing?" "Yeah, and driving on weekends." Renee frowned. "Marcus, you're going to kill yourself." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're running yourself into the ground." Marcus took a sip of coffee and didn't say anything. Renee sighed. "I know you're doing it for her. I know you want to give her everything, but you can't give her anything if you're dead from exhaustion." "I'm not going to die, Renee." "You don't know that. You're not invincible." Marcus looked over at Emma, who was now lying on the floor next to the cat, whispering something to her in a voice too quiet to hear. She looked so happy, so unbothered by all the things that kept Marcus up at night, the bills, the debt, the constant worry that he wasn't doing enough. "I just want her to have a good life." he said quietly. Better than the one I had. Renee reached across the table and took his hand. She already does, Marcus. Because she has you. Marcus didn't say anything. He just squeezed her hand and looked away. They spent the rest of the afternoon catching up. Renee told him about her job, about the chaos of the ER, about the patient who'd come in last week convinced he'd been poisoned by his neighbor's Wi-Fi router. Marcus told her about Emma's school, about the teacher who'd called him in for a meeting because Emma had been caught giving half her lunch away to a kid who didn't have one. She's got your heart, Renee said, smiling. Yeah, that's what scares me. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep in the guest room, Marcus sat on the back porch with a beer he didn't really want and stared up at the sky. The stars were harder to see here than they were back home. Too much light pollution. But if he squinted, he could make out a few of them, faint and flickering. He thought about the woman on the plane. He didn't know why. It was stupid. She was probably already back to her life, whatever that looked like. Probably already forgotten about him. People like her didn't remember people like him. They moved in different worlds, lived in different universes. But he couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd looked when she woke up. The confusion, the embarrassment, the way she'd apologized like falling asleep was some kind of crime. He wondered what her life was like, if she had people who cared about her, if she had anyone waiting for her when she got home. He hoped she did. The back door creaked open and Renee stepped outside, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Can't sleep? She asked. Not really. She sat down next to him. You want to talk about it? Not much to talk about. Renee gave him a look. Marcus, I've known you your whole life. I can tell when something's on your mind. He took a sip of beer and didn't answer. Renee waited. Finally, Marcus said, You ever meet someone and just feel like you were supposed to? Renee raised an eyebrow. That's a weird question coming from you. I know. Where's this coming from? Marcus shrugged. There was this woman on the plane. She sat next to me and Emma, spent the whole flight working on her laptop, didn't say a word to us. Then she fell asleep. On my shoulder. Renee's eyes widened. Okay, now I'm interested. It's not like that. She was just tired. Like, really tired. And when she woke up, she looked so, I don't know, lost, I guess. Did you talk to her? A little, not much. She thanked me for charging her phone. You charged her phone? Her battery was low. It wasn't a big deal. Renee smiled. You're such a good person, Marcus. It's kind of annoying. Marcus laughed. Yeah, well, I don't know why I'm still thinking about her. It's dumb. It's not dumb. Maybe you connected with her. We didn't connect. We barely spoke. But sometimes you don't need to speak to connect with someone. Renee leaned back in her chair. Did you get her name? Marcus shook his head. No, I didn't ask. Do you want to? He thought about that for a long moment. I don't know. Probably wouldn't matter anyway. She's clearly someone important, successful. I could tell just by looking at her. And you're not important? You know what I mean? Renee looked at him, her expression serious. Marcus, you're one of the best people I know. You work harder than anyone I've ever met. You're raising an amazing kid all by yourself. You're kind, you're patient, you're decent. Don't sell yourself short just because you don't have a fancy job or a big bank account. Marcus didn't say anything. He stared down at the beer in his hands, turning the bottle slowly. I'm serious, Renee said. If this woman can't see how incredible you are, that's her loss. I don't even know if I'll ever see her again. Then let it go. Or don't. But stop acting like you're not worth knowing. Marcus smiled, even though he didn't quite believe her. Thanks, Renee. Any time, little brother. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of wind through the lemon tree. Marcus finished his beer and set the bottle down on the porch railing. I should get some sleep, he said. You should. You look like you're about to fall over. Marcus stood and headed toward the door. He paused, one hand on the frame, and looked back at Renee. You really think Emma's doing okay? He asked. Renee's expression softened. Marcus, that kid is thriving, and it's because of you. Don't ever doubt that. Marcus nodded, even though the doubt never really went away. It was just part of being a parent, he figured. The constant worry, the nagging fear that you were screwing everything up. He went inside, checked on Emma one more time. She was sprawled out on the bed, one arm flung over her stuffed rabbit. her face peaceful. And then he collapsed onto the couch in the living room. He didn't bother pulling out the sofa bed. He just lay down, pulled a throw blanket over himself, and closed his eyes. Sleep came faster than he expected. And somewhere across the city, in a hotel suite that cost more per night than Marcus made in a month, Victoria Hale lay awake, staring at the ceiling, and thought about a man whose name she didn't know. The next 2 days blurred together for Victoria. More meetings, more pitches, more handshakes and forced smiles and conversations that felt like performances. She was good at it. She'd been doing it for years. She could read a room, adjust her tone, say exactly what people wanted to hear without giving away more than she needed to. But something felt off. She couldn't focus. Her mind kept drifting. In the middle of a presentation, she'd lose her train of thought and have to glance at her notes to remember what she was supposed to say. During a lunch meeting with a potential partner, she caught herself staring out the window, watching people walk by on the street, wondering where they were going, what their lives looked like. Her assistant noticed. "Are you okay?" Jennifer asked on the third day, after Victoria had zoned out during a phone call and had to ask the person on the other end to repeat themselves. "I'm fine," Victoria said automatically. "You don't seem fine. You seem distracted." "I'm just tired." Jennifer gave her a look that said she didn't believe that for a second, but she didn't push. She just handed Victoria her schedule for the next day and left. Victoria sat alone in her hotel room that night, scrolling through her phone. She'd cleared her inbox, responded to every message, approved every document that needed approval. There was nothing left to do. She thought about calling someone, a friend maybe. Except she didn't really have friends. She had colleagues, business contacts, people who smiled at her during conferences and sent her LinkedIn requests and invited her to galas she never attended. She thought about her parents, her mother, who lived in Connecticut and sent her passive-aggressive emails about why she never visited. Her father, who'd remarried and started a whole new family and barely remembered to text her on her birthday. She thought about the man on the plane. It was ridiculous. She knew it was ridiculous. She didn't even know his name. Didn't know anything about him except that he was kind and patient and had a daughter who clearly adored him. But she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd smiled at her when she woke up, the way he'd told her it was okay, the way he'd charged her phone without making a big deal out of it, like it was just something you did for another person. When was the last time someone had done something for her without wanting something in return? Victoria set her phone down and walked over to the window. The city stretched out below her, a grid of lights and movement, millions of people living their lives, most of whom she would never meet, never know, never affect. She felt so small and so incredibly lonely. She pressed her forehead against the glass and closed her eyes. "What am I doing?" she whispered. No one answered. Marcus spent the next few days in Pasadena, letting Emma run wild with Renee, who spoiled her in all the ways Marcus couldn't afford to. They went to the zoo. They got ice cream. They stayed up late watching movies and eating popcorn until Emma crashed on the couch, sugar high and exhausted. Marcus helped Renee around the house, fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom, replaced a broken light fixture in the hallway, mowed the overgrown lawn. It felt good to work with his hands, to do something concrete and tangible, something that didn't involve spreadsheets or loading docks or dealing with customers who treated him like he was invisible. On the last night, Renee made dinner, spaghetti and meatballs, Emma's favorite. They ate together at the kitchen table, and Emma talked nonstop about everything they'd done, recounting every detail like it was the most important thing in the world. And then the penguins were swimming, Daddy, and one of them did a flip. A flip! Aunt Renee saw it too. "I did see it," Renee confirmed, grinning. "That sounds amazing, Em." It was the best day ever. Marcus looked at his daughter, at the joy on her face, and felt something tighten in his chest. He'd give anything to give her more days like this, more trips, more ice cream, more moments where she didn't have to worry about anything except which movie to watch next. But he couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. After dinner, after Emma had gone to bed, Marcus and Renee sat on the porch again, the same as they had a few nights before. "You leaving tomorrow?" Renee asked. "Yeah, early flight." "You going to be okay?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I'll be fine." "You say that a lot." "Because it's true." Renee looked at him for a long moment. "You know you can ask for help, right? You don't have to do everything alone. I'm not alone, I've got Emma. That's not what I mean. Marcus sighed. I know, but I'm doing okay, Renee. Really. She didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. They sat in silence, watching the sky darken, the stars appearing one by one. You ever think about what you'd do if money wasn't an issue? Renee asked suddenly. Marcus laughed. All the time. What would you do? He thought about that. I don't know. Spend more time with Emma, I guess. Maybe go back to school, finish my degree. You should. Yeah, well, someday. Someday isn't a plan, Marcus. I know. Renee leaned her head on his shoulder. You deserve good things. I hope you know that. Marcus didn't answer. He just looked up at the stars and wondered if the woman from the plane was looking at them too. The flight back to Chicago was uneventful. Marcus and Emma sat in the back of the plane this time, coach seats that were cramped and uncomfortable, but they didn't mind. Emma colored in a new coloring book Renee had bought her, humming quietly to herself, while Marcus stared out the window and tried not to think about the stack of bills waiting for him at home. When they landed, it was snowing. Not a lot, just a light dusting that made everything look clean and quiet. Emma pressed her face against the car window on the ride home, watching the flakes fall, and Marcus felt the familiar weight settle back onto his shoulders. The trip was over. Reality was back. Their apartment was exactly how they'd left it, small, cluttered. The heat barely worked, and there was a stain on the ceiling above the kitchen sink that Marcus kept meaning to fix but never had time for. Emma ran straight to her room to put her new coloring book on her shelf, and Marcus dropped their bags by the door and stood in the middle of the living room, looking around at the life he'd built. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. He pulled out his phone and checked his work schedule. 2 shifts at the warehouse this week, both overnight. 3 rideshare blocks on the weekend. A tutoring gig on Thursday that paid under the table. It was going to be tight, but he'd make it work. He always did. Emma came back out, dragging her stuffed rabbit behind her. Daddy, can we have mac and cheese for dinner? Marcus smiled. Yeah, sweetheart. We can do that. He made her the mac and cheese from the box, the cheap kind that cost 99 cents and tasted like nostalgia and salt. She ate it at the kitchen table, swinging her legs and telling him more stories about the zoo, about Aunt Renee, about Mocha the cat who'd let her pet her without scratching. Marcus listened, nodding in all the right places, but his mind kept drifting. Back to the plane. Back to the woman who'd fallen asleep on his shoulder. Back to the look on her face when she'd woken up, like she couldn't quite believe what had happened. He wondered if she was okay. It was a stupid thing to wonder. She was a stranger. She was fine. She probably hadn't thought about him once since they'd parted ways, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't fine, that maybe she was just as tired and lonely and lost as he was. Emma finished her dinner and went to brush her teeth. Marcus cleaned up the kitchen, washing the single pot and the 2 bowls they'd used, and then he sat down on the couch and stared at the wall. His phone buzzed. A text from the warehouse manager, asking if he could pick up an extra shift next week. Marcus stared at the message for a long time before typing back a response. Yeah, I can do that. He put the phone down and rubbed his eyes. He was so tired, not just physically, but in a way that went deeper, a kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. Emma appeared in the doorway, her toothbrush still in her hand. Daddy, will you read me a story? Marcus looked at her hopeful face and her messy ponytails, and felt something crack open in his chest. Yeah, baby, I'll read you a story. He tucked her into bed, read her 3 chapters of the book they'd been working through together, and kissed her forehead goodnight. She was asleep before he even left the room. Marcus stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her breathe, and he thought about all the things he couldn't give her. The big house, the fancy school, the trips to Disneyland, the life she deserved, and then he thought about the things he could give her, his time, his love, his presence. Maybe that was enough. He closed her door softly and went to his own room, collapsing onto the bed without even taking off his shoes. He was asleep in minutes. But Victoria returned to Chicago on a gray Tuesday morning, and the city felt colder than it had when she'd left. She went straight to the office, didn't even stop at her apartment. There was too much to do. The funding announcement needed to be finalized. The PR team was waiting for her approval on the press release. The board wanted a strategy meeting to discuss the next phase of expansion. She walked into the building and felt the familiar hum of energy, the buzz of people moving with purpose, the click of keyboards and the murmur of voices in conference rooms. This was her world. This was what she'd built. So why did it feel so hollow? She took the elevator up to the 43rd floor and stepped into her office. Jennifer was already there, coffee in hand, a stack of documents on the desk. "Welcome back," Jennifer said. "How was LA? Productive?" "Good, because we have a lot to cover. The press release goes out tomorrow, and the board wants to meet Thursday. Also, you have 3 interview requests from tech journals, and someone from TED reached out about a speaking slot." Victoria nodded, barely listening. She set her bag down and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. From up here, everything looked small, manageable, like she could control it all if she just worked hard enough. But she couldn't, and she was starting to realize that. "Victoria?" She turned. Jennifer was watching her with a concerned expression. "Are you sure you're okay?" Jennifer asked. "I'm fine." "You keep saying that." "Because I am." Jennifer didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. She just handed Victoria the stack of documents and left. Victoria sat down at her desk and tried to focus. She read through the press release, made a few edits, approved the final draft. She answered emails. She reviewed projections. She did everything she was supposed to do. But her mind kept wandering. She thought about the flight, about Marcus, about the way he'd sat there for hours, letting her sleep, not complaining, not making her feel like she was a burden. She thought about his daughter, about the pink suitcase and the stuffed rabbit, and the way the little girl had looked at her father like he was the center of her universe. Victoria pulled out her phone and opened a search engine. She typed in a few keywords, hesitated, then deleted them. What was she even looking for? She didn't know his last name, didn't know where he lived, didn't know anything except that he was a single father who worked hard and had kind eyes. She put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. This was insane. She was being ridiculous. She needed to let it go. But she couldn't. That night, alone in her penthouse, Victoria poured herself a glass of wine she didn't drink and stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. She thought about her life, about the choices she'd made, the sacrifices, the long hours, the relationships she'd let fall apart because work always came first. She thought about her ex-boyfriend, the one who'd left her 3 years ago because he was tired of coming second to her company. She thought about her college roommate, who'd stopped inviting her to things because Victoria always said no. She thought about her mother's last email, the one that had said, "You're so busy being successful, you've forgotten how to be human." Victoria had deleted that email without responding, but maybe her mother was right. She set the wine glass down, untouched, and went to bed. She didn't sleep well. She kept waking up, disoriented, reaching for her phone to check the time, scrolling through emails that could have waited until morning. At 3 a.m., she gave up and went into her home office. She opened her laptop and started working on a new proposal, something she'd been putting off for weeks. But her focus was shot. She kept staring at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, unable to form coherent thoughts. Finally, she closed the laptop and pulled out a notebook, an actual physical notebook, something she hadn't used in years. She opened it to a blank page and stared at it for a long time. Then she started writing. She didn't know what she was writing. It wasn't a business plan or a strategy document. It was just thoughts, feelings, things she'd been pushing down for so long she'd almost forgotten they existed. She wrote about the loneliness, about the exhaustion, about the gnawing sense that something was missing, that she'd spent so long chasing success she'd forgotten what she was even chasing it for. She wrote about the man on the plane. She didn't use his name because she didn't know it. She just called him the stranger. She wrote about the way he'd taken care of his daughter, the way he'd been so present, so patient, so completely unbothered by the chaos of traveling with a kid. She wrote about the way he'd let her sleep, the way he'd charged her phone, the way he'd smiled at her when she woke up, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She wrote until her hand cramped, and then she stopped and read what she'd written. It was messy, unpolished, raw. It was the most honest thing she'd written in years. She closed the notebook and put it away, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. Demet. Marcus's life fell back into its usual rhythm. Work. Emma. Work. Sleep when he could. Repeat. The warehouse shifts were brutal. Overnight, 10 hours of lifting and loading and moving inventory in a building that was always too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. His back ached, his knees hurt. He was 32 and already felt like he was 50. But the pay was steady, and he couldn't afford to lose it. On the weekends, he drove for the rideshare app, picking up drunk college kids and tired business people and tourists who didn't know where they were going. Some of them tipped well. Most didn't. He didn't complain. He just smiled, said thank you, and moved on to the next fare. Emma started second grade. She came home every day with stories about her teacher, Miss Carter, who was nice but strict, and her new friend, a boy named Leo, who apparently had the best Pokemon cards in the whole class. Marcus listened to every story, asked questions, made her snacks, helped her with her homework. He was running on fumes, but he showed up. He always showed up. One night, after Emma had gone to bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. Rent, utilities, groceries, Emma's after-school program, the minimum payment on his credit card, which never seemed to go down no matter how much he paid. He did the math 3 times, hoping the numbers would change. They didn't. He was short. Again. Marcus leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He could pick up another shift, maybe 2. He could skip a few meals, save money on groceries. He could push through. He'd done it before. But he was so tired. His phone buzzed. A text from Renee. "How's my favorite niece?" Marcus smiled despite himself. "She's good. Talked my ear off about Pokemon today. That kid is going places. You're doing a great job, Marcus." "Thanks. I'm serious. Don't forget that." Marcus put the phone down and looked at the bills again. He'd figure it out. He always did. A few days later, Marcus was driving a late-night rideshare shift when he picked up a woman in her 50s from a fancy hotel downtown. She was dressed in a business suit, carrying a leather briefcase, and she looked just as exhausted as he felt. She got in the back seat and gave him an address in the suburbs. "Rough night?" Marcus asked, trying to make conversation. The woman sighed. "Rough week. Rough month, actually." "I hear that." They drove in silence for a while. Marcus navigated through the late-night traffic, the streets mostly empty except for a few cabs and delivery trucks. "Can I ask you something?" the woman said suddenly. Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Sure." "Do you ever feel like you're working yourself to death for something you're not even sure matters?" Marcus thought about that. "Yeah, I do." "How do you deal with it?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know if I deal with it exactly. I just keep going because I have to, because I've got someone depending on me." The woman nodded slowly. "Your kid?" "Yeah, my daughter." "How old is she?" 6. "That's a good age." "It is." The woman was quiet for the rest of the ride. When they pulled up to her house, she handed Marcus a $50 bill and told him to keep the change. The fare was only $20. "Thank you," Marcus said, genuinely surprised. The woman smiled, and it was the first time all night she'd looked anything other than exhausted. "Thank you for the conversation." She got out of the car and walked toward her house, and Marcus sat there for a moment, staring at the 50 in his hand. Sometimes kindness showed up in the strangest places. He drove home, parked the car, and walked up to the apartment. It was late. Emma was asleep. The place was quiet. Marcus collapsed onto the couch and stared at the ceiling. He thought about the woman on the plane again. He didn't know why he kept thinking about her. It had been weeks now, almost a month. She was probably halfway around the world by now, living her life, doing whatever important people did. But he couldn't shake the memory of her face when she'd woken up. The vulnerability, the confusion, the exhaustion that looked so much like his own. He hoped she was doing better. He hoped someone was taking care of her the way she needed to be taken care of. Victoria made a decision. It took her 3 weeks of thinking about it, of pushing the idea away and then pulling it back, of telling herself it was stupid and then realizing she didn't care. She was going to find him. She didn't know how. She didn't even know if it was possible. But she had resources. She had money. She had people who could track down information if she asked them to. So she asked. She called a private investigator, a woman she'd used once before when the company had needed background checks on potential hires. The woman's name was Diane, and she was discreet, professional, and very good at her job. "I need you to find someone," Victoria said. "Okay. What information do you have?" "Not much. His first name is Marcus. He's a single father. He has a daughter named Emma, around 6 years old. He was on a flight from Chicago to LA about a month ago." That's all I know. There was a pause on the other end of the line. That's not a lot to go on, Diane said. I know, but can you do it? Another pause. It'll take some time, and it won't be cheap. I don't care about the cost. All right, give me 2 weeks. Victoria hung up and felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. What was she doing? This was crazy. This was invasive. This was the kind of thing stalkers did, not successful CEOs. But she didn't care. She needed to know if he was okay. She needed to thank him. She needed to do something, anything, to make sense of the way that one brief encounter had stayed with her, had burrowed into her chest and refused to let go. 2 weeks passed. Victoria threw herself into work, trying to distract herself, but it didn't help. She kept checking her phone, waiting for Diane to call. Finally, the call came. I found him, Diane said. Victoria's heart jumped. You did? Marcus Reed, 32 years old, lives on the South Side, works at a warehouse and drives for a rideshare company on the weekends. Daughter's name is Emma, 6 years old, attends Jefferson Elementary. Victoria grabbed a pen and started writing. What else? He's struggling, Victoria. Financially, I mean. He's got a lot of debt, behind on a few bills, but he's clean, no criminal record, no red flags, just a guy trying to make ends meet. Victoria felt something twist in her chest. Okay, thank you. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. She hung up and stared at the name she'd written down. Marcus Reed. She said it out loud, testing how it felt. It felt right. She spent the next few days thinking about what to do. She could send him money. She could pay off his debts. She could set up a fund for Emma's education. She had the resources to change his life with the stroke of a pen. But that felt wrong. It felt like charity, like pity. And she didn't want him to feel pitied. She wanted him to know that what he'd done mattered, that his kindness had meant something, that he'd changed her, even if he didn't realize it. So she sat down and wrote him a letter. It took her hours. She wrote draft after draft, crossing out sentences, rewriting paragraphs, trying to find the right words. She wasn't used to this. She was used to emails and memos and presentations. She wasn't used to honesty, but she forced herself to be honest. She told him about the flight, about how exhausted she'd been, how she hadn't meant to fall asleep on him, how she'd woken up embarrassed and confused. She told him about the way he'd taken care of her, how he'd charged her phone and protected her space, how he'd smiled at her like it was no big deal. She told him it was a big deal. She told him that she'd been thinking about him ever since, that she couldn't stop thinking about him, that his kindness had cracked something open in her that she didn't even know was closed. She told him she wanted to help, not because she felt sorry for him, but because he'd helped her, and she wanted to return the favor. She didn't promise anything specific. She just asked him to consider it, to let her do something for Emma, to give her the chance to say thank you in a way that mattered. She folded the letter and put it in an envelope. She wrote his address on the front, the one Diane had given her, and then she sat there staring at it, wondering if she was making a mistake. Finally, she called her assistant. Jennifer, I need you to send something for me. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. Marcus had just gotten home from an overnight shift at the warehouse. His body ached in places he didn't know could ache. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. He'd stopped at the corner store on the way home to grab milk and bread. The basics, because the fridge was empty again and Emma would need breakfast before school. He climbed the stairs to the apartment, each step feeling like it required more effort than the last, and found a small stack of mail shoved into the slot beside his door. Bills, mostly. A flyer for a pizza place that had closed 6 months ago, and a cream-colored envelope with his name written in elegant handwriting. Marcus stared at it. No return address. Just his name and address, written in letters that looked too careful, too deliberate to be junk mail. He unlocked the door and dropped the grocery bag on the counter. Emma was still asleep. He had maybe 30 minutes before she woke up, before he had to get her ready for school, before the day officially started and his brief window of quiet disappeared. He sat down at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten on thick paper that felt expensive. Marcus unfolded it and started reading. The first line stopped him cold. Dear Marcus, you don't know me, but we sat next to each other on a flight from Chicago to Los Angeles about a month ago. Marcus's heart started beating faster. He kept reading. I'm the woman who fell asleep on your shoulder. I know that probably sounds strange, and I'm sure you weren't expecting to hear from me. To be honest, I wasn't sure I was going to reach out. But I couldn't stop thinking about what happened that day, and I realized I needed to tell you something. What you did for me, letting me rest, charging my phone, not making me feel like I was an inconvenience, meant more to me than you could possibly know. I was exhausted, not just physically, but in a way that goes deeper than sleep can fix. I've spent the last few years building a company, chasing success, working myself to the point where I forgot what it felt like to be human. And then you reminded me. You didn't have to be kind to me. You didn't owe me anything. But you were kind anyway. And that small act of kindness cracked something open in me that I didn't even know was closed. Marcus stopped reading and looked up at the ceiling. He tried to remember her face, the dark hair, the expensive suit, the way she'd looked when she woke up, mortified and apologetic. He kept reading. I've thought about you a lot since that flight, about the way you took care of your daughter, about the patience and love I saw in every interaction between the two of you. It was clear to me, even in those few hours, that you're an incredible father, that you're giving her something far more valuable than anything money can buy. But I also know that being a single parent is hard. I don't know your situation, and I don't want to presume anything, but I wanted to reach out and offer something. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because you helped me when you didn't have to, and I'd like to help you in return. I've set up an education fund for Emma. It's enough to cover her schooling through college, including tuition, books, and living expenses. It's managed by a trust, so you don't have to worry about anything except making sure she has the opportunity to pursue whatever she wants in life. I know this might seem overwhelming, or strange, or like too much, but please understand, this isn't charity. This is gratitude. You gave me something I desperately needed, even if you didn't realize it, and I'd like to give something back. I don't expect anything from you. You don't need to respond to this letter. You don't need to thank me. I just wanted you to know that your kindness mattered, that it changed something in me, that I won't forget it. Take care of yourself, Marcus, and take care of Emma. The world needs more people like the two of you. The letter was signed simply, Victoria. Marcus read it 3 times. Then he set it down on the table and stared at it, his mind spinning. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of scam. People didn't just set up education funds for strangers. People didn't track down someone from a flight and send them life-changing letters out of nowhere. But the paper felt real. The handwriting looked real. And something about the tone of the letter, the honesty in it, made him think it wasn't a scam. He picked up the envelope and checked for more information. There was a business card tucked inside that he'd missed. It had a phone number and an email address, along with the name of a law firm, Whitmore and Associates. Marcus sat there for a long time, the letter in one hand, the business card in the other. Emma's alarm went off in her room. He heard her moving around, the familiar sounds of her waking up. In a minute, she'd come out, rubbing her eyes, asking what was for breakfast. Marcus folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. He slid it into the drawer where he kept important documents, birth certificates, lease agreements, things that mattered. He didn't know what to do with it yet. He didn't know if it was real or if it would fall apart the moment he tried to verify it. But for the first time in a very long time, Marcus felt something other than exhaustion. He felt hope. Victoria didn't hear anything for 2 weeks. She hadn't expected to. She'd told him he didn't need to respond, and she'd meant it. But still, every time her phone buzzed, every time an email came through, she felt a small jolt of anticipation, wondering if it was him. It never was. She threw herself into work, same as always. The funding round had gone through. The company was scaling faster than she'd anticipated. There were new hires to onboard, new strategies to implement, new markets to explore. The board was thrilled. The investors were thrilled. Everyone was thrilled. Victoria felt numb. She went through the motions, attended meetings, gave presentations, made decisions, but her mind kept drifting back to the letter, to Marcus, to the question of whether she'd done the right thing or if she'd just made everything worse. Jennifer noticed, of course. Jennifer noticed everything. "You've been distracted," she said one afternoon, setting a coffee down on Victoria's desk. "I'm fine." "You've said that about 40 times in the last month. It's starting to lose its meaning." Victoria looked up at her. "I'm handling it." "Handling what?" Victoria hesitated. She didn't talk about personal things with Jennifer. Didn't talk about personal things with anyone, really. But something about the way Jennifer was looking at her, patient and non-judgmental, made her want to say it out loud. I did something impulsive, Victoria said quietly. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. You? Impulsive? I don't believe it. I'm serious. Okay, what did you do? Victoria told her. Not all of it, but enough. About the flight, about Marcus, about the letter, about the education fund. Jennifer listened without interrupting. When Victoria finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Wow, Jennifer said finally. Yeah. That's actually really kind of amazing. Victoria frowned. You think I'm crazy? No, I think you're human, which honestly is kind of refreshing. Victoria looked away. I don't know if I did the right thing. Why not? Because I don't know him. I don't know his situation. What if he doesn't want help? What if I just made things harder for him? Jennifer shook her head. Victoria, you set up a fund for his kid's education. You didn't show up at his house and throw money at him. You gave him a choice. That's not making things harder. That's giving him options he didn't have before. Maybe. No, not maybe. Definitely. Jennifer leaned against the desk. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why does this matter so much to you? Victoria thought about that. Because he was kind to me, and I can't remember the last time someone was kind to me without wanting something in return. Jennifer's expression softened. Then you absolutely did the right thing. Victoria nodded, but the doubt didn't go away. It sat in her chest, heavy and persistent, and no amount of reassurance could shift it. That night, alone in her apartment, Victoria stood by the window and looked out at the city. She thought about Marcus, about whether he'd read the letter, about whether he believed it, about whether he was angry or confused or relieved. She thought about Emma, about the little girl with the lopsided ponytails and the purple coat, about the life she might have now, the opportunities that might be open to her. And she thought about herself, about the person she'd been before the flight and the person she was becoming after it. Something had shifted, something fundamental, and she didn't know how to make sense of it yet. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Victoria's heart jumped. She picked up the phone and opened the message. Is this Victoria? She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she typed back, Yes. Is this Marcus? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Yeah. It's me. Victoria sat down on the couch, her hands shaking slightly. She didn't know what to say. She'd written the letter, put the ball in his court, and now he was reaching out and she had no idea how to respond. Another message came through. I got your letter. I don't really know what to say. Victoria typed quickly. You don't have to say anything. I meant what I wrote. No response needed. I know. But I wanted to say something anyway. She waited. Thank you. I don't know how else to put it. Just thank you. Victoria felt her throat tighten. She blinked hard and typed back, You're welcome. There was a pause, then another message. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you do this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Victoria stared at the question. She thought about all the things she could say, all the explanations she could give, but in the end, she just told him the truth. Because you were kind to me when I needed it, and I wanted to be kind back. Another pause. That's it? That's it. She could almost feel him processing that on the other end. I don't know what to say. You already said thank you. That's enough. Is it really real, the fund? Yes. I can send you the details if you want. It's managed by a law firm, completely legitimate. Okay. Okay. There was a longer pause this time. Victoria waited, her heart beating faster than it should. Finally, another message came through. I've been thinking about that flight too. More than I probably should. I kept wondering if you were okay. Victoria felt something crack in her chest. I'm better now, thanks to you. I didn't do anything. You did more than you know. Another pause. Can I ask you something else? Sure. Do you want to meet? For coffee or something? I'd like to say thank you in person, if that's not weird. Victoria stared at the message. Her first instinct was to say no, to keep things distant, to protect the fragile thing that had formed between them, whatever it was. But she didn't want to say no. I'd like that. Yeah? Yeah. They made plans to meet that Saturday at a coffee shop near Marcus's neighborhood. Nothing fancy. Just a place to sit and talk. Victoria put her phone down and sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. She felt nervous and excited and alive. Marcus didn't sleep the night before they were supposed to meet. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through 1,000 scenarios in his head. What if it was awkward? What if they had nothing to talk about? What if she took one look at him in the daylight and regretted everything? What if she didn't show up at all? He almost canceled 3 times. Typed out the text, stared at it, deleted it. But Saturday morning came and he didn't cancel. He dropped Emma off at Renee's place. His sister had agreed to watch her for a few hours, and she'd asked approximately 0 questions, which Marcus appreciated. He wasn't ready to explain this yet. He wasn't sure he could. The coffee shop was a small place on the corner of a busy street, the kind of place that served decent coffee and had mismatched furniture and a chalkboard menu that changed every week. Marcus had been there a few times before. It was unpretentious, comfortable. He arrived 10 minutes early and ordered a coffee he didn't really want, just to have something to do with his hands. He sat down at a table near the window and watched people walk by outside, trying to calm his nerves. What was he even doing here? He was about to stand up and leave when the door opened and she walked in. Victoria. She looked different than she had on the plane. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, no suit, no polished veneer. Her hair was down. She looked younger, less guarded. She saw him and smiled, and Marcus felt his chest tighten. She walked over and sat down across from him. "Hi," she said. "Hati." They stared at each other for a moment, both of them clearly unsure how to start. "Thanks for coming," Marcus said finally. "Thanks for reaching out." Victoria ordered a coffee, and they sat there in silence while they waited for it to arrive. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, exactly, but it wasn't easy either. When her coffee came, she wrapped her hands around the cup and looked at him. "I wasn't sure you'd actually meet me," she said. "I wasn't sure I would either." She smiled a little. "Glad you did." "Me too." They talked for a while, tentative at first, feeling each other out. Marcus told her about Emma, about how she was doing in school, about the Pokemon obsession, and the new friend named Leo. Victoria told him about her company, about the funding round, about the chaos of scaling a business. But the conversation shifted slowly into something deeper. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said. "Sure." "That day on the plane, why did you let me sleep? Most people would have woken me up." Marcus thought about that. "I don't know, you looked tired, really tired, like you needed it more than I needed my personal space." "That's kind of you." He shrugged. "It's just basic decency, isn't it?" Victoria shook her head. "You'd be surprised how rare that is." They were quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something now?" Marcus said. "Of course." "Why did you really do this? The fund, I mean. It's a lot of money. You don't know me. You don't know Emma. Why?" Victoria looked down at her coffee. "Honest answer? Yeah. Because I've spent the last few years building something that's supposed to matter. And I look at what I've built, and I feel empty. Like I've been chasing the wrong thing. And then I sat next to you on that plane, and you were just there. Present. Kind. Taking care of your daughter like it was the most important thing in the world. And it was. And I realized I'd forgotten what that felt like. To care about something that actually mattered. Marcus didn't know what to say to that. "I know it probably sounds ridiculous," Victoria continued, "but that flight changed something in me, and I wanted to do something with that. Something real." "It doesn't sound ridiculous." She looked up at him. "No?" "No." They sat there looking at each other, and Marcus felt something shift between them. Something fragile and uncertain, but real. "Can I tell you something?" Marcus said. "Please." "I've been struggling for a long time, trying to give Emma everything she needs, trying to keep us afloat, trying to be enough. And most days I feel like I'm failing, like no matter how hard I work, it's never going to be enough." Victoria's expression softened. "And then I got your letter," Marcus continued, "and I didn't know what to do with it, because part of me felt like I didn't deserve it, like I didn't do anything special. But another part of me felt relieved, like maybe I could stop drowning for a second, like maybe I could give Emma something better than what I've been able to give her." "You deserve it," Victoria said quietly. "You absolutely deserve it." Marcus looked away. I don't know about that. I do. They talked for another hour about their lives, about their struggles, about the things they wanted and the things they'd lost. It felt easy, in a way Marcus hadn't expected, like they'd known each other longer than a few hours on a plane. When they finally left the coffee shop, Marcus walked Victoria to her car. She stopped before getting in and turned to face him. Thank you for meeting me, she said. Thank you for everything. You don't have to keep thanking me. I know, but I'm going to anyway. She smiled. Fair enough. They stood there for a moment, neither of them quite ready to leave. Can I ask you one more thing? Marcus said. Sure. Can we do this again? Meet up, I mean. Just to talk. Victoria looked surprised. You'd want to? Yeah, I would. She nodded slowly. I'd like that too. They exchanged numbers, real ones this time, and said goodbye. Marcus walked back to his car and sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. He'd gone into that coffee shop expecting awkwardness, maybe regret, but what he'd found was something he hadn't expected at all. He'd found a friend. They met again 2 weeks later, then again the week after that, and the week after that. It became a routine neither of them had planned, but both of them needed. Saturday mornings at the coffee shop, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 3. They talked about everything and nothing, about work and family and the strange, messy business of being human. Marcus told her about the warehouse, about the ridiculous things that happened on late-night rideshare shifts, about the time Emma had convinced him to let her eat ice cream for breakfast because it was technically dairy and dairy was healthy. Victoria told him about board meetings that felt like theater, about the loneliness of success, about how she'd spent so long climbing the ladder she'd forgotten to look around and see if anyone was climbing with her. They were different in almost every way. Different worlds, different lives, different definitions of what mattered. But somehow, sitting across from each other in that coffee shop, those differences didn't seem to matter. One Saturday, about 2 months after their first meeting, Marcus brought Emma with him. He'd been hesitant about it. He didn't know if Victoria wanted to meet her, didn't know if it would be weird or awkward or too much. But Emma had asked about the woman Daddy kept meeting for coffee, and Marcus had run out of vague answers. So he asked Victoria if it would be okay. She'd said yes immediately. Emma walked into the coffee shop holding Marcus's hand, wearing her favorite purple jacket and carrying her stuffed rabbit. She looked around with wide eyes, taking everything in, and then she spotted Victoria sitting at their usual table. Is that her, Daddy? Yeah, sweetheart, that's her. Emma walked over slowly, suddenly shy. Victoria smiled at her, and it was the kind of smile that didn't feel forced or polite. It felt real. Hi, Emma, Victoria said. Your dad's told me a lot about you. Emma looked up at Marcus, then back at Victoria. He talks about you too. Marcus felt his face heat up. It's okay, Victoria said, laughing. I'm glad he does. Emma climbed into the chair next to Victoria and set her rabbit on the table. This is Mr. Hops. He comes everywhere with me. He's very handsome, Victoria said seriously. Emma beamed. I know. They ordered hot chocolate for Emma and spent the next hour talking. Well, Emma talked. Mostly about Pokemon and her friend Leo and the new book series Miss Carter was reading to the class. Victoria listened like it was the most interesting thing she'd ever heard, asking questions, laughing in all the right places. Marcus watched them and felt something settle in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. When they left the coffee shop, Emma hugged Victoria goodbye without being prompted. Victoria looked surprised, but she hugged her back, and Marcus saw something soften in her expression, something vulnerable and unguarded. She's wonderful, Victoria said after Emma had run ahead to look at a dog tied up outside the shop. Yeah, she is. You're doing a great job with her, Marcus. I mean it. Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They stood there for a moment, watching Emma crouch down to pet the dog, who was wagging its tail so hard its whole body shook. Can I tell you something? Victoria said quietly. Sure. I've been thinking a lot about my company, about what I'm building, about whether it actually matters. Marcus looked at her. What do you mean? I mean, I've spent years chasing growth and profit and validation from people who don't even know me. And I thought that's what success looked like. But then I met you and Emma, and I realized I've been measuring the wrong things. I don't know if we're the best benchmark, Marcus said, smiling a little. You are, though. You're raising an incredible kid. You're kind, you're present, you're building something that actually matters. And I want that. I want to build something that matters too. Marcus didn't know what to say. He just looked at her, at the honesty in her face, and felt something shift between them again. You'll figure it out, he said finally. You think so? Yeah, I do. Victoria smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, Marcus thought she looked genuinely happy. 3 months after that first coffee meeting, Victoria made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She stepped down as CEO. Not entirely. She stayed on the board, stayed involved in strategy and vision, but she handed over the day-to-day operations to her COO, a woman named Sarah, who was more than capable and had been quietly running half the company anyway. The announcement sent shockwaves through the industry. Tech blogs wrote think pieces. Investors called emergency meetings. Her mother sent her a confused email asking if she was having some kind of breakdown. But Victoria didn't care. She'd spent enough of her life doing what other people expected. It was time to do what she wanted, and what she wanted was to build something different. She started a foundation, a small one, at first, focused on supporting single parents who were struggling to make ends meet. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't going to make headlines, but it was real, and it mattered. And for the first time in years, Victoria felt like she was doing something that actually aligned with who she wanted to be. Marcus helped her figure out what people actually needed. Not what she thought they needed, but what they really needed. Childcare assistance, flexible work programs, education funds, mental health support. They spent hours talking through ideas, refining plans, making sure the foundation wasn't just throwing money at problems, but actually solving them. And somewhere in the middle of all that work, somewhere between the coffee shop meetings and the late-night phone calls and the moments when they'd catch each other's eye and smile for no reason, something shifted again. They fell in love. It wasn't dramatic. There was no big moment, no grand confession. It just happened, quietly and inevitably, like water finding its level. Marcus realized it first. He was sitting on the couch one night, Emma asleep in her room, and he was texting Victoria about a potential partnership with a local nonprofit. She sent him a meme about corporate jargon, and he laughed out loud, and then he stopped and thought, I love her. It wasn't a question. It was just a fact. He didn't say anything right away. He didn't know how. They'd built something good, something solid, and he didn't want to ruin it by pushing too hard or too fast. But Victoria figured it out on her own. She was sitting in her apartment one evening, going through grant applications for the foundation, and she realized she was smiling. Not because of the work, but because she was thinking about Marcus, about the way he listened, about the way he made her laugh, about the way he saw her, really saw her, in a way no one else ever had. And she thought, oh. She called him that night. Hey, she said when he picked up. Can we talk? Marcus's heart jumped. Yeah, of course. Is everything okay? Yeah, I need to tell you something. There was a pause. Marcus could hear Emma's white noise machine humming in the background. Okay, he said. I'm listening. Victoria took a breath. I think I'm falling in love with you, and I don't know what to do about it. Marcus sat there, phone pressed to his ear, and felt his chest tighten. You don't have to say anything, Victoria continued quickly. I just needed to say it out loud. I needed you to know. Victoria, it's okay if you don't feel the same way. I mean, we're friends, and that's good, and I don't want to mess that up. Victoria, she stopped. I love you too, Marcus said. The silence on the other end was so complete he thought the call had dropped. You do? Victoria said finally, her voice small. Yeah, I do. Oh. Marcus laughed, and the sound surprised him. Is that all you've got? Oh? I didn't expect you to say it back. Why not? I don't know. Because I'm a mess? Because I have no idea what I'm doing with my life right now? Because I'm probably the least romantic person you've ever met. You're not a mess, and you're figuring it out, and I don't care about romance. I care about you. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said very softly, I don't know how to do this, Marcus. I don't know how to be in a relationship. I'm not good at it. I'm not either. We'll figure it out together. You make it sound so easy. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Victoria laughed, and it sounded a little wet, like she might be crying. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of pretending I don't feel things I actually feel. Yeah, me too. They talked for another hour about what this meant, about what they wanted, about the fact that their lives were complicated and messy, and nothing about this was going to be simple. But they wanted to try anyway. 6 months later, Victoria met Emma's teacher at a parent-teacher conference. Marcus had invited her. Not as a girlfriend exactly, because they were taking things slow, but as someone important in Emma's life. Someone who mattered. Victoria had been terrified. She didn't know how to talk to teachers. Didn't know what questions to ask. Didn't know if she had any right to be there at all. But Marcus had squeezed her hand and told her it was fine. And so she sat next to him in the tiny classroom chair and listened as Miss Carter talked about Emma's progress. She's doing wonderfully, Miss Carter said. She's kind, she's curious, she's a natural leader. The other kids really look up to her. Marcus beamed. That's great to hear. She's also mentioned you a few times, Miss Carter said, looking at Victoria. Victoria blinked. Me? She talks about how you help her dad with his work, how you take her to museums sometimes. She's very fond of you. Victoria felt her throat tighten. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded. After the conference, they picked Emma up from Renee's place and took her out for ice cream. Emma ordered a sundae with way too many toppings and talked nonstop about a science project she was working on. Victoria watched her, this bright, happy, incredible kid, and thought about how close she'd come to never knowing her, how close she'd come to staying in her lonely penthouse, buried in work, convinced that success was the only thing that mattered. She thought about the flight, about falling asleep on Marcus's shoulder, about the kindness of a stranger that had cracked her open and changed everything. What are you thinking about? Marcus asked quietly. Victoria looked at him. How lucky I am. Yeah, me too. They walked Emma home and Victoria stayed for dinner. It was nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread and a salad Marcus threw together, but it felt like everything. After Emma went to bed, Victoria and Marcus sat on the couch, close but not touching, just being together in the quiet. Can I ask you something? Marcus said. Always. Do you ever regret stepping down? From the CEO thing? Victoria thought about that. No, I don't. I thought I would. I thought I'd feel like I gave up something important, but I didn't give it up. I just made room for something else. The foundation? The foundation. You, Emma. A life that actually feels like mine. Marcus smiled. That's a good answer. What about you? Victoria asked. Do you ever regret the way things turned out? The struggles, the hard years, all of it? Marcus was quiet for a long time. I don't know if regret is the right word. I wish things had been easier. I wish I could have given Emma more, but I don't regret the person it made me, and I don't regret meeting you. Even though I tracked you down like a stalker? Marcus laughed. Even though. They sat there, side by side, and Victoria thought about the strange, unlikely path that had brought them here. How a moment of exhaustion on a plane had led to this, to love, to family, to a life she hadn't known she wanted until she had it. What? A year later, Victoria stood on a stage in front of 300 people and told them a story. It was a fundraiser for the foundation, an event she'd been dreading for weeks. She hated public speaking, hated being vulnerable in front of strangers. But Marcus had convinced her that people needed to hear it. So she told them about the flight, about being so exhausted she'd fallen asleep on a stranger, about waking up to find that stranger had taken care of her without asking for anything in return, about how that one small act of kindness had changed her entire life. She didn't use Marcus's name, she didn't need to. The story wasn't about him exactly, it was about what he represented, about the power of showing up for people, about the way small gestures could ripple out and change everything. When she finished, the room was silent. Then someone started clapping, and then someone else. And then the whole room was on its feet, applauding, and Victoria stood there, stunned, feeling tears prick at her eyes. Marcus was in the front row, Emma beside him. He was smiling at her, and Victoria felt her heart swell. After the event, after the donors had left and the venue had emptied out, Victoria found Marcus waiting for her by the entrance. You did good, he said. You think so? I know so. Emma ran up and hugged Victoria's legs. You were amazing. Victoria laughed and picked her up, even though she was getting too big for it. Thanks, kiddo. They walked out together into the cool night air, and Victoria felt something settle in her chest. This was her life now. Not perfect, not polished, not the life she'd planned, but it was hers, and it was enough. 2 years after that first flight, Marcus proposed. It wasn't fancy. There was no elaborate plan, no grand gesture. They were sitting on the couch in his apartment, Emma asleep in her room, and they were watching a movie neither of them was really paying attention to. Marcus turned to her and said, "Marry me." Victoria blinked. "What?" "Marry me. I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring things out, but I love you, and I want to build a life with you, a real one. So marry me." Victoria stared at him. "You don't even have a ring." "I'll get you a ring. I'll get you whatever you want. Just say yes." Victoria felt tears spill down her cheeks. "You're such an idiot." "Is that a yes?" "Yes. Yes, of course it's a yes." Marcus kissed her, and Victoria kissed him back, and somewhere in Emma's room, the white noise machine hummed on, oblivious to the fact that everything had just changed again. They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the coffee shop where they'd first met. Emma was the flower girl. Renee cried the whole time. Victoria's mother showed up and actually smiled. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was theirs. And years later, when people asked Victoria how she'd met her husband, she always told them the same thing. She'd fallen asleep on a plane, and when she woke up, her whole life had changed. Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness is all it takes to rewrite a destiny, to crack open a heart that's been closed for too long, to remind someone that they're not alone. Marcus had reminded her of that, and in return, she'd given him something he'd never thought he could have: a partner, a future, hope. Emma grew up knowing she was loved. She went to college on the fund Victoria had set up, studied environmental science, and came home every holiday with stories that made Marcus's heart swell with pride. Victoria's foundation grew. It helped thousands of families, gave people opportunities they never thought they'd have, changed lives in ways both big and small. And Marcus kept showing up. For Emma, for Victoria, for everyone who needed him. Because that's what he did. And maybe that's the real lesson. That success isn't measured in money or power or titles. It's measured in the people you show up for, in the lives you touch, in the kindness you offer when no one's watching. Marcus had shown kindness to a stranger on a plane, and that stranger had taken that kindness and turned it into something bigger than either of them could have imagined. That's how the world changes, not through grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but through small moments of grace, through people who choose to be kind when they don't have to be, through the quiet, unnoticed acts that ripple out and touch lives we'll never even know about. Victoria and Marcus didn't have a perfect life. They fought sometimes. They struggled. They made mistakes. But they loved each other. They showed up for each other. And they built something real. And in the end, that was more than enough. They met again 2 weeks later. Then again the week after that. And the week after that. It became a routine neither of them had planned, but both of them needed. Saturday mornings at the coffee shop, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 3. They talked about everything and nothing, about work and family, and the strange, messy business of being human. Marcus told her about the warehouse, about the ridiculous things that happened on late-night rideshare shifts, about the time Emma had convinced him to let her eat ice cream for breakfast because it was technically dairy, and dairy was healthy. Victoria told him about board meetings that felt like theater, about the loneliness of success, about how she'd spent so long climbing the ladder she'd forgotten to look around and see if anyone was climbing with her. They were different in almost every way. Different worlds, different lives, different definitions of what mattered. But somehow, sitting across from each other in that coffee shop, those differences didn't seem to matter. One Saturday, about 2 months after their first meeting, Marcus brought Emma with him. He'd been hesitant about it. He didn't know if Victoria wanted to meet her, didn't know if it would be weird or awkward or too much. But Emma had asked about the woman Daddy kept meeting for coffee, and Marcus had run out of vague answers. So he asked Victoria if it would be okay. She'd said yes immediately. Emma walked into the coffee shop holding Marcus's hand, wearing her favorite purple jacket and carrying her stuffed rabbit. She looked around with wide eyes, taking everything in, and then she spotted Victoria sitting at their usual table. "Is that her, Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart, that's her." Emma walked over slowly, suddenly shy. Victoria smiled at her, and it was the kind of smile that didn't feel forced or polite. It felt real. "Hi, Emma," Victoria said. "Your dad's told me a lot about you." Emma looked up at Marcus, then back at Victoria. "He talks about you too." Marcus felt his face heat up. It's okay," Victoria said, laughing. "I'm glad he does." Emma climbed into the chair next to Victoria and set her rabbit on the table. "This is Mr. Hops. He comes everywhere with me." "He's very handsome," Victoria said seriously. Emma beamed. "I know." They ordered hot chocolate for Emma and spent the next hour talking. Well, Emma talked, mostly about Pokemon and her friend Leo and the new book series Miss Carter was reading to the class. Victoria listened like it was the most interesting thing she'd ever heard, asking questions, laughing in all the right places. Marcus watched them and felt something settle in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. When they left the coffee shop, Emma hugged Victoria goodbye without being prompted. Victoria looked surprised, but she hugged her back, and Marcus saw something soften in her expression, something vulnerable and unguarded. "She's wonderful," Victoria said after Emma had run ahead to look at a dog tied up outside the shop. "Yeah, she is. You're doing a great job with her, Marcus. I mean it." Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Over the next few months, their friendship deepened into something neither of them had words for yet. Victoria started coming to Emma's school events. Marcus helped Victoria think through ideas for a foundation she was building, something focused on supporting single parents who were struggling the way he had struggled. They didn't talk about what was happening between them. They didn't need to. It was there, in the way they looked at each other, in the way conversations stretched longer than they should, in the comfortable silences that felt like home. One evening in late spring, Victoria called him. It was almost 10 at night, later than she usually reached out. "Hey," she said when he picked up. "Can we talk?" Marcus's heart jumped. "Yeah, of course. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, I need to tell you something." There was a pause. Marcus could hear Emma's white noise machine humming in the background. "Okay," he said. "I'm listening." Victoria took a breath. "I think I'm falling in love with you, and I don't know what to do about it." Marcus sat there, phone pressed to his ear, and felt his chest tighten. "You don't have to say anything," Victoria continued quickly. "I just needed to say it out loud. I needed you to know." "Victoria, it's okay if you don't feel the same way. I mean, we're friends, and that's good, and I don't want to mess that up." "Victoria," she stopped. "I love you too," Marcus said. The silence on the other end was so complete he thought the call had dropped. "You do?" Victoria said finally, her voice small. "Yeah, I do." "Oh," Marcus laughed, and the sound surprised him. "Is that all you've got? Oh? I didn't expect you to say it back. Why not?" "I don't know. Because I'm a mess? Because I have no idea what I'm doing with my life right now. You're not a mess, and you're figuring it out. I don't care about any of that. I care about you." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said very softly, "I don't know how to do this, Marcus. I'm not good at relationships." "I'm not either. We'll figure it out together." "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy, but it's worth it." They talked for another hour about what this meant, about what they wanted, about the fact that their lives were complicated and nothing about this was going to be simple, but they wanted to try anyway. 3 months later, Victoria made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She stepped down as CEO. Not entirely. She stayed on the board, stayed involved in strategy. But she handed over the day-to-day operations to her COO, a woman who'd been quietly running half the company anyway. The announcement sent shockwaves through the industry. Tech blogs wrote think pieces. Investors called emergency meetings. Her mother sent her an email asking if she was having some kind of breakdown. But Victoria didn't care. She'd spent enough of her life doing what other people expected. It was time to do what she wanted, and what she wanted was to build something different. She launched the foundation she'd been planning with Marcus's help, focused on supporting single parents who were struggling to make ends meet. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't going to make headlines, but it was real, and it mattered. And for the first time in years, Victoria felt like she was doing something that actually aligned with who she wanted to be. Marcus helped her figure out what people actually needed. Not what she thought they needed, but what they really needed: childcare assistance, flexible work programs, education funds, mental health support. They spent hours talking through ideas, refining plans, making sure the foundation wasn't just throwing money at problems, but actually solving them. A year after that first coffee meeting, Victoria stood on a stage in front of 300 people at a fundraiser for the foundation and told them a story. She told them about the flight, about being so exhausted she'd fallen asleep on a stranger, about waking up to find that stranger had taken care of her without asking for anything in return, about how that one small act of kindness had changed her entire life. She didn't use Marcus's name. The story wasn't about him exactly, it was about what he represented, about the power of showing up for people, about the way small gestures could ripple out and change everything. "I spent years chasing success," Victoria said, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "I thought that's what mattered: money, power, recognition. And I got all of it. But I was miserable. I was lonely. I was running myself into the ground for something I didn't even understand anymore." She paused, scanning the crowd. "And then a stranger charged my phone on a plane. That's all it was. A tiny gesture. But it reminded me that kindness still exists, that people still show up for each other. And it made me realize I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to build something that actually mattered." When she finished, the room was silent. Then someone started clapping, and then someone else. And then the whole room was on its feet, and Victoria stood there, feeling tears prick at her eyes. Marcus was in the front row, Emma beside him. He was smiling at her, and Victoria felt her heart swell. After the event, after the donors had left and the venue had emptied out, Marcus found her by the entrance. "You did good," he said. "You think so?" "I know so." Emma ran up and hugged Victoria's legs. "You were amazing." Victoria laughed and crouched down to Emma's level. "Thanks, kiddo." They walked out together into the cool night air, and Victoria thought about how far she'd come, how a moment of exhaustion on a plane had led to this, to love, to family, to a life she hadn't known she wanted until she had it. 6 months later, Marcus proposed. It wasn't fancy. They were sitting on the couch in his apartment, Emma asleep in a room, watching a movie neither of them was really paying attention to. Marcus turned to her and said, "Marry me." Victoria blinked. "What?" "Marry me. I know we're still figuring things out, but I love you, and I want to build a life with you, so marry me." Victoria stared at him. "You don't even have a ring." "I'll get you a ring. I'll get you whatever you want. Just say yes." Victoria felt tears spill down her cheeks. "You're such an idiot." "Is that a yes?" "Yes. Of course it's a yes." Marcus kissed her, and Victoria kissed him back, and somewhere in Emma's room, the white noise machine hummed on, oblivious to the fact that everything had just changed again. They got married 4 months later in a small ceremony at the coffee shop where they'd first met as friends. Emma was the flowers girl, walking down the makeshift aisle with Mr. Hops tucked under one arm and rose petals clutched in the other. Renee cried the whole time. Victoria's assistant Jennifer was there, grinning like she'd known this would happen all along. It wasn't perfect. The coffee machine broke halfway through the ceremony. Emma dropped half the petals in one spot. Marcus stumbled over his vows twice. But it was theirs. Years later, when people asked Victoria how she'd met her husband, she always told them the same thing. She'd fallen asleep on a plane. And when she woke up, her whole life had changed. Emma grew up knowing she was loved by 2 people who would move mountains for her. She went to college on the fund Victoria had set up, studied environmental science, and came home every holiday with stories that made Marcus's heart swell with pride. She never forgot where she came from, never took for granted the opportunities she'd been given. Victoria's foundation grew beyond anything she'd imagined. It helped thousands of families, gave people opportunities they never thought they'd have, changed the trajectory of lives that had seemed stuck. And Marcus kept showing up. For Emma. For Victoria. For everyone who needed him. He eventually left the warehouse and started working for the foundation, using his lived experience to shape programs that actually worked, because that's what he did. He showed up. Maybe that's the real lesson buried in all of this. Success isn't measured in money or power or titles. It's measured in the people you show up for, in the lives you touch, in the kindness you offer when no one's watching and there's nothing to gain. Marcus had shown kindness to a stranger on a plane, And that stranger had taken that kindness and turned it into something bigger than either of them could have imagined. That's how the world changes. Not through grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but through small moments of grace, through people who choose to be kind when they don't have to be, through the quiet, unnoticed acts that ripple out and touch lives we'll never even know about. Victoria and Marcus didn't have a perfect life. They fought sometimes about stupid things like whose turn it was to do dishes. They struggled when Emma went through a rough patch in middle school. They made mistakes, said the wrong things, had to apologize and try again. But they loved each other. They showed up for each other. And they built something real. And in the end, that was more than enough.